There is so much MMA history that I have absorbed over the years being a cartoon since 2012, and I know you guys too, if you regularly watch this channel, are damn near walking wikis, but there's only so much space in our brains, and I swear to you, there are some massive fights that were scheduled to happen and that fell out that somehow do not get the attention that many of our most maligned canceled fights get. Your Jones versus Rumbles, your Tony versus Khabibs, your Tony versus Khabibs again.
I've been trying to forget that.
So today, I would love to highlight 10 of these really huge canceled fights that for one reason or another just never get talked about anymore. I'm Tommy from MMA On Point, and these are 10 gigantic fights you can't believe almost happened. Number 10, Donald Cerrone versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. Yes, before there was Khabib and Tony Ferguson's cursed rivalry, there was Khabib and Donald Cerrone's. Now, this one was nowhere near as cursed, but it was scheduled twice officially, and twice officially didn't happen. Before I tell you why, you want to take a guess? Take a wild guess why they didn't happen? Yeah, you know why they didn't happen. And both times these two were officially scheduled, the implications were pretty damn big. The first time around, the Eagle had just 30-27 former champion RDA, and Cowboy was on a crazy run of 4 victories in a row with 4 performance bonuses to go with them. It was a white-hot fight that lasted less than an episode of SpongeBob.
That fight is made. 20 minutes later, Khabib, he went into the gym and blew his knee out.
Replacing Khabib on the night would be the debuting Eddie Alvarez. While Nurmagomedov rehabbed his knee, Cowboy went and rattled off 2 more victories, fuck you kicking Miles Jury on the ground for a UD, and then earning a decision win over Benson Henderson. This dude was on fire. Finally, Khabib was ready to come back, and the UFC was ready to make this thing happen again. But then 3 weeks before the fight, Khabib's Fabergé egg knee shattered again, and Cerrone beat up poor John McDessie. When Khabib was finally better, the matchup had passed them by, and he was paired with Tony Ferguson, about that totally happened that everybody loved. Number 9, Cody Garbrandt versus Davison Figueiredo at flyweight for gold. What a journey Cody Garbrandt took over the course of 4 years. Most presidencies aren't filled with as many twists and turns. A quick recap, Cody went from unranked to toppling the greatest bantamweight of all time in Dom Cruz in one of the greatest championship performances of all time in a single year. After that, he spent 2 years losing to former buddy TJ Dillashaw, and then the year after that, he weirdly brawled with Pedro Munoz and got KO'd. How the mighty had fallen. But a year later, Cody would be back at it and got possibly his coolest finish with a big old knockout of Rafael Assunção. A couple months later, the UFC was like, you know what? Let's put Cody in a title fight against Davison Figueiredo at flyweight, even though he's never fought there and just beat Rafael Assunção, a bantamweight. You see, Brandon Moreno had not yet been formed from Legos, and so flyweight was in desperate need of somebody cool for Figgy to fight. Unfortunately, though, Garbrandt would get absolutely jacked up by COVID, like real bad.
Vertigo, blood clots, pneumonia. I had it all. It was really bad. I had it for like 4 or 5 months. I was testing positive for it.
And so the UFC was forced to call the fight off and give Alex Perez a shot at the God of War. The fight would randomly get made again, this time swapping divisions as the first prelim for UFC 300 4 years later. Number 8, Nick Diaz versus Eddie Alvarez. This is all Seth Petrozelli's fault. Thanks a lot. What's Seth's nickname? The Silverback. Thanks a lot, the Silverback. Yeah, so in 2008, Elite XC was hot shit. They had Kimbo Slice, the biggest thing the internet had ever produced, as their star attraction, and he got the promotion on network television in the US for millions to see. In that same time period, Nick Diaz was just an absolute menace in the promotion. He came in off his weed suspension after the Gomi fight in Pride and was generally raising hell when or doctor stoppage. It was peak anti-establishment Nick Diaz. At that same time, Eddie Alvarez was in his true underground kingdom, beating people up for Bodog fight, wrecking house in the Dream Lightweight GP that he absolutely would have won if he didn't get injured. Side note, go back and watch the Joachim Hansen fight. It is a banger.
The right by Alvarez.
Anyway, Elite XC's next event was going to feature these two ass kickers for vacant gold at 160 pounds, and I cannot imagine how awesome that fight would have been, and I'll never get to see it because the promotion would implode after the Silverback didn't do what he was told and wrestled Kimbo Slice. Oh wait, no, he just knocked him out. Never mind. They were doomed. But yeah, still sad they never had another event, if only because we didn't get Diaz versus Alvarez. Number 7, Tyron Woodley versus Leon Edwards. Now, everybody and their best friend's mom knows that the Pandusky took Khabib versus Tony from us. And if you're a regular watcher of MMA On Point, I'm gonna go ahead and guess that you also remember that it took the insane fight from us that was Jose Aldo versus Henry Cejudo for bantamweight gold. But one of the first and biggest fights, COVID 3027, was one that I'm sure UK fans absolutely remember getting scrapped because a whole ass London card ceased to exist. Yes, the recently dethroned champion Tyron Woodley was going to take on, at the time, nobody's favorite English fighter, Leon Edwards, in what would have been an absolutely massive fight implications-wise for the welterweight division. Edwards hadn't fought in nearly a year, his last victory a UD over RDA, capping off an 8-fight run in the division. As Pandy restrictions started ramping up, the UFC planned on moving the card to the US. Sorry, Londoners. Which would eliminate Leon's participation because of the travel bans. With rumors swirling at the time, Woodley was adamant that the fight was still on.
Until Dana White calls me himself. Until then, I am locked on that date. I'm trained to peak on that date.
It in fact was not on, but everybody would miss out, ultimately not just those in the UK, as this would be the first of 5 events the UFC would be forced to cancel before they purchased the state of Florida and a fight island. Number 6, Frank Mir versus Cain Velasquez. This has to be the only time in MMA history that horse meat earned somebody a title shot that wasn't named Alistair Overeem. Not that the Reem wasn't involved, it was of course his horse. Let's break this down. UFC 146 was a gimmick event that the promotion came up with where the entire main card would be heavyweight fights.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now, given the slogs that the big boys can put on when they gas out in 45 seconds, this could have turned into a disaster. But it actually paid off exactly how they wanted, with every single main card fight getting a finish. Originally, Frank Mir, who was on a 3-fight win streak and just awesomely tore Nogueira's arm off, was going to take on Cain Velasquez, who had just lost his title in 64 seconds to Junior Dos Santos. JDS would headline the card against late-stage Ubereem, who had just a few shows earlier diverticulitis Brock Lesnar's guts. But the horse meat would catch up with Reem, and he would take a 2-year vacation. With their heavyweight gimmick card needing a heavyweight title fight to headline, they turned to the streaking Mir, who would come up short in his last chance at UFC gold. Number 5, BJ Penn versus Carlos Condit. One of the most iconic moments of Nick Diaz's UFC run is without question the beatdown he gave BJ Penn for calling out George St. Pierre, who was sitting in the crowd.
I don't think George is hurt. I think he's scared.
It was pure, uncut Stockton, but because UFC 137 was such a giant mess, I think a lot of fans forget what was taken from us in order to get that Diaz call-out. Nick was originally scheduled to fight for the title against GSP that night in his return to the promotion after 5 years. But when Diaz no-showed a press conference, the UFC decided to teach him a lesson by ruining the entire event for the fans and pulling his shot. Thanks, guys. Carlos Condit and BJ Penn were meant to fight on the undercard, with the winner getting the next shot at gold. You know this would have been an amazing fight, and it was right there for us to enjoy, but after Nick got pulled, Condit was upgraded to title challenger. That was until GSP pulled out with an injury or a condition called scared to fight everybody right now if you're Nick. Prior to the main event being destroyed, the UFC decided to pair Penn and Diaz, which was an awesome choice and would end up saving the card as the new main event, but I am still bummed we never got to see the Prodigy and NBK. Number 4, Chael Sonnen versus Vitor Belfort. Another situation that was such a mess, most people forgot this ended up official for however brief a time. The fight that Chael Sonnen was originally going to have at UFC 175 was against his carpool buddy Vanderlei Silva. They even coached Tough Brazil together to promote it. I'm sure you remember it was when Chael famously expressed his boundary issues.
I can't let you get close.
That little dust-up slightly delayed the fight, but it's not why it fell apart. That was because Vandy refused a test from INSAC, a choice that would see him initially banned for life from Nevada. But they changed it. With Vandy out of the way indefinitely, the UFC turned to recently un-TRT'd Vitor Belfort, who was sitting out of the middleweight title picture and thought, yeah, sure, I'll beat up Chael Sonnen in the meantime. But right after that got announced, the American gangster had his own issues with PEDs and Nevada, and everything just got scrapped. Fun little aside, listen to Chael talk about Vitor a week after his first fight of that insane 2013 run where he'd go on a TRT-fueled rampage.
Vitor Belfort? I didn't even know Vitor Belfort was still in the UFC.
A joke that would age like hard-boiled eggs left in your car. Number 3, Shogun Rua versus Rashad Evans. Well, this one certainly had some unforeseen consequences. So in 2010, Rashad Evans was in a white-hot feud with Rampage Jackson, so much so that their fight would sell over 1 million buys without a belt on the line. The fight would kinda suck, but Rashad Rashad won, and afterwards, Dana announced that Evans would be the first defense of the newly crowned light heavyweight champion Shogun Rua. About a year from now, when the champion has recovered from knee surgery and you're no longer hot because you've been sitting on the shelf for so long. And as fate would have it, a couple months before the fight was scheduled, Evans himself had knee problems and would be forced out. So the UFC decided to offer the fight to Rashad Evans' teammate John Jones, who literally seconds earlier beat Ryan Bader. Weirdly, the UFC has scrubbed Joe Rogan, surprising JBJ with this title fight offer in their post-fight interview on Fight Pass, but it happened. I was watching that night. I can confirm. This would all lead to a rift between Evans and Jones that would split their team and culminate in a fight a year later. It was a huge rivalry, but because there was so much drama between the two of them, most people forgot what was the catalyst for this thing in the first place. Number 2, Brock Lesnar versus Junior Dos Santos. What's really insane about this one is that there was a whole damn season of Tough with this pair as coaches to promote this fight, and everybody has still kinda had this Men in Black wiped from their memory. But this was meant to be the big comeback fight for Brock after he dropped the title to Kane. In fact, the season and the fight were both announced just a few short months after Velasquez made Lesnar breakdance. How big did DF Dubs expect this non-title fight to be? Well, here's what he thought would happen to the winner.
I think stadium shows are going to be one-off fights. Depending on who wins out of Dos Santos and Lesnar against our heavyweight champion, could be a big fight.
Now, don't get me wrong, this stadium idea was likely 90% Brock and a 10% calculating error for JDS, but still, the point was, it's a huge fight that didn't happen. Why? Well, Brock needed a foot of his colon removed because of diverticulitis, an ailment I assume you can only get by eating raw bears, which is what I imagine is Lesnar's entire diet. Dos Santos would instead retire Shane Carwin and go on to ruin the UFC's debut on Fox. Number 1, Royce Gracie versus Mark Kerr. When I first presented this list to the boys, every single entry was from a UFC card, because those were the ones in my research that made the most sense, but they suggested looking a bit further into other promotions, so I combed through every Pride FC event to make sure I didn't miss anything great. Initially, I was like, there's just nothing here, unfortunately. Like, Mark Hunt versus Butterbean is not a huge fight. I would watch the fucking shit out of it, but that's not big enough for this list. But yeah, NSAC was like, this fight will suck, we can't sanction it. Then I found real insanity. Sakuraba versus Minotauro Nogueira, the night that Nog fought Fedor for the first time. Unfortunately though, beyond Tapology, I cannot substantiate this information anywhere. So that one was out. I was gonna go with maybe Anderson Silva versus Paulo Filho, a fight that some years later would have essentially been the number 1 and number 2 middleweights in the world. But yeah, no, it has to be Royce Gracie versus Mark Kerr at Pride 2. 2 UFC tournament winners. This would have been Royce's first fight since drawing with Ken Shamrock at UFC 5, and the implications of this fight, if it happened, are insane. Because if Kerr won, which we're talking prime smashing machine, he was probably winning this one, the entire course of MMA history might have changed. We may not have ever gotten Saku versus Royce. Would that fight have even mattered if Kerr had already beat him? It's crazy to think how this all played out and how it could have played out. Royce's contract was a 7-figure one, but he would pull out of the fight with a back injury, one that conveniently allowed him to avoid a monster wrestler. I'm not saying anything, I'm just saying. And I'm also saying show some love to Max Randall. He is the editor of this video. He kicked the shit out of it. Follow him on his socials, go watch his YouTube channel, and give him a digital high five. A massive thanks to our channel members. Guys, we've restructured things. There's one flat price now. Get exclusive content today. Like and subscribe if you want to watch Butterbean versus Mark Hunt. Leave a comment about which of these fights completely lapsed from your memory like mine, and thank you so much for watching. You guys be good now.